All right, good morning, everybody. Today we are going to be taking a look at the origins of the revolution and the steps that all happen for the war to begin proper for independence in America. Right, so to begin, let's look at the ideological origins of the revolution. So we're going to be looking at how did the ideas of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson of Thomas Paine, I should say, influence Jefferson's writings in the Declaration of Independence? It's all going to lead up to the independence movement now. So, new political ideas are really starting to thrive in the 1700s, okay? And it's all ideas about how the people of a nation and their government interact with one another. Now, this revolutionary generation, they're going to form this political philosophy that lays the institutional foundations for the system of government under which we live today in this country. And the American Revolution is then going to be inspired by the ideas concerning natural rights and political authority, and its successful completion affected people and governments throughout the world for many generations. This all dates back to now with this independence movement. Now, the Enlightenment and the social contract. So, you should all remember from world history too, learning about the Enlightenment. You got all the different philosophers like Rousseau and, all those guys, right? And there's one who's more important than all the others when it comes to the United States, and that is John Locke. All right. He's going to write about the relationship between the rulers and the people who they rule over. Right. He is going to say that all people are born with these natural rights of life, liberty, and property. These are rights that people, no matter who they are, whether they're a king, an emperor, a president, whatever, that they cannot take away. Now, he also presents the idea that original power, that the ruling class, their power comes from the people, and that we consent to what is called a social contract. And what that basically means is that we're all born free, 100% doing whatever we want, whenever we want. But for protection from others harming us, we give away some of that freedom of ours to another person so that they can provide us protection. Okay? So that is the whole idea, that the ruling class is only in place because we allow them to be there. All right? And in return for the protection that we want, we give up some of those freedoms that we have, and we obey laws that are given to us by the people who we want protection, like to give us protection. Okay? And this establishes what is called ordered liberty. Liberty meaning, freedoms, but there are certain rules that need to be followed to keep the system working. And the government's powers are limited as well to being those that the people have consented to let them have. So the government's powers are only there because we let it be there. So whenever a government becomes a threat to people's natural rights of life, liberty, and property, it is the people's right to basically replace that government with one that will work for them. And these ideas that Locke is putting forward, they are basically the ones that shatter what has been in place for, hundreds, thousands of years of monarchy rule. Now, this is going to help inspire Thomas Paine, these ideas, for him writing his pamphlet, the short little booklet called Common Sense, that challenges the rule of the American colonies by the King of England. He's like, Why should this little island across an ocean from us rule the vastness, the great size that is the American colonies? These colonies are, 10 times bigger than the island of England. Why should they rule us? We should rule ourselves. So he's going, with this pamphlet, he's going to inspire like independence, like feelings in the people, or at least in a decent number of people in the colonies. All right. So let's look at the Declaration here just a little bit. Now, when we get into it, we're going to be going more in depth later on in this video, but we're just going to get a little rundown now. So the main author of the Declaration is Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. It reflected a lot of the ideas of John Locke and of Thomas Paine, and it is like the foundation of like American freedom and what we stand for, and it is going to inspire democracy or democratic revolutions around the world. We are the example that these other countries follow, like the French Revolution. They will follow our example. The Latin American revolutions, like in Mexico, in Argentina, in Colombia, in Peru, in Haiti, they follow our example. All right. This right here, this is basic details talking about, from the Declaration, that of some of the things that we wanted and what we believed in, such as, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable or like rights that cannot be taken away, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Property is changed to pursuit of happiness because not everybody wants to own property. Okay, so you have a right to be happy in whatever way suits you, as long as it's nothing crazy, right? Like killing people. Right? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All right? That to secure these rights, governments are put in place by men, by the people, and their powers, the powers of the government, are only granted by the consent, by the go-ahead of the people that it governs. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, or becomes dictatorial, totalitarian, becomes like way too overbearing, like controlling the lives of the people, it is the right of the people to alter, to change that government, or to abolish it, to get rid of it, and to institute a new government. If a government becomes too overbearing and corrupt and controlling of the people, it is the people's right, it is their God-given right to overthrow that government and put a new one in its place that will better serve the people. That is what the Declaration is saying. Right? The ideas of the Enlightenment and the perceived unfairness of British policies provoked debate and resistance by the American colonists. So now we're going to start taking a look at what that all looked like. So the signs of unrest in the colonies. Now, war is expensive. We've talked about the French and Indian War already. That was a big expense for the British, right? They have a huge area that they have just gained control over, everything that is on this side of the Appalachian Mountains, right? So they're also in debt from fighting the wars. And now they need ways to manage all of the expenses, to manage this debt that they have. Now, should the colonists pay for part of that debt? That's the big question, right? So take, for instance, police, right? Police, their job is to protect people, right? Now, they deserve to be paid for that, I would imagine, right? So how do they get paid? They get paid from the tax dollars that we give the government and our local our local jurisdictions, like the town taxes, county taxes, things like that. So that is why taxes are in place to take care of those governmental expenses for, so that's just how it works. Why shouldn't it be the same with the colonies? The British military came in and protected the colonies and protected them from being taken over by the French, right? So why shouldn't the colonists have to pay part of the bill? Now, we also have this, that proclamation of 1763 that we talked about in the last video a little bit, that forbid anybody from crossing from the 13 colonies over the mountains and into all that open territory that they just won from the French and Indian War. Because you're like, hey, it's too big. We can't police that area. We cannot provide you with protection. And this is going to anger a lot of colonists. It was like, hey, we fought for that land, like to gain access to it. Why can't we go there? This is nonsense. So you can understand both sides of that argument. Like, hey, go over there. We're not going after you if something happens. It's like, well, I'm going anyway. That type of argument's going on. Now, one of the big ones that's really going to start ruffling everyone's feathers is the Sugar Act of 1764. So it taxed all non-British sugar and molasses, so sugar products. So colonial merchants, they were purchasing and smuggling French molasses, cheaper price. Merchants then sold the rum to the colonists because you use sugar to make rum, and they would also export that to foreign markets. And the British Navy is going to crack down on the smuggling, and yeah, it's going to just cause a whole bunch of economic craziness here. Then we also get the more infamous one, the Tea Act. So basically, the British East India Trading Company, they are going to be granted a monopoly. They get to say whatever price they want for their product, which is tea. It would prevent colonial merchants from importing tea from any other places, only through the East India Company. Colonists would respond by boycotting the sale of tea. They would not buy it, just on principle. It's like, we only have to buy from these people and they get to charge us whatever they want. I just won't drink it. Also, something called the Courting Act is put in place. This would require colonists to provide accommodations or to house British troops when they are stationed in the area. So that's one way the British were trying to cut costs and save money for themselves. It's like, why should we build all these forts and all these barracks for the troops to stay in? Just let the colonists who they were protecting house them and feed them. Why should we pay that bill? Let them pay it. Then we have the Stamp Act. This was the big and final straw over everything else. It required all paper products, whether it is a paper napkin or a letter, like an envelope, or a playing card. It had to have an official seal stamped onto it, and it cost extra money because everything had to be stamped with it, and it would cost extra money to do so. So now it's like, oh, they're nickel and diming us even just over a playing card now? That's it. I've had enough. So then it's going to lead to more of an open set of revolutionaries. Now, the first shooting that happens for the revolution is this. A street fight is going to break out in the city of Boston, and basically it is a small group of soldiers who are protecting the I believe it was the town hall building. And there was one protester from Boston who actually climbed up the side of the building, got up into the bell tower, started banging the bell in it, and people are coming out like where's the fire? Because the town bell would be a signal like, hey, there's something bad going on, like a fire's broken out. And then what a protester takes a stone, covers it with snow, because this is happening in the winter, by the way. He throws it, hits one of the British soldiers with it. The guy goes to the ground, and as people are coming out of their homes saying, like, where's the fire? And all the bell ringing going on, all the shouting going on, he, when he stands back up, he points his musket at the crowd that's protesting, fires a shot, and it hits this guy, Crispus Attucks, who is a black sailor, and he is the first official casualty of the Revolutionary War. And then the officer of these British soldiers, he basically goes like, "Why did you fire? Why did you fire?" And with all the ruckus going on, the other handful of soldiers that are there, they hear the word fire and they just like, "Uh-oh," bang, they open fire into the crowd, killing four more people. And that is how the actual fighting got started with the revolution. It's not the official start of the revolution, like the war part, but this was like the first blood to be shed for the revolution. All right. This then is going to lead to the Boston Tea Party, when the governor of Boston allows three ships that are full, just crammed full of tea, to sit in the harbor. The citizens who are in protest of the British, they basically row out to these ships. They're dressed up like Native Americans, like the Mohawk tribe, and they board the ships, which are unguarded for some reason, and they throw all of the cargo, like back then it was like thousands of pounds worth, like the money pound, like British pound, into the water, and it would be like the equivalent of throwing millions of dollars worth of tea into the ocean. That is what happens. So, in result of this, we get what is called the Intolerable Acts. King George of the Third of England, he's furious over all of these protests and all the violence that's starting to break out. So we have the Boston Harbor closed to all trade. A general is made the governor of Massachusetts, and it's now basically under military occupation, so under control of the army. They arrested anybody who was involved with these protests and sent them to England to be tried. So it was not looking good at all. And then, because there are rumors of a armed resistance possibly starting soon, like people stockpiling weapons and ammunition, this general by the name of Gage, who is in charge of Boston, he sets up a plan to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who are two of the ringleaders of a lot of this unrest with the colony. So he is wanting to find these guys and find the stockpile of weapons and ammunition. And so he sets it all out like, we know where they are. We're going to march there in the night and we're going to find them. We're going to arrest them. And then that's it. So what happens is there are spies who basically intercept what's going to happen. They signal people, and basically the word gets out that, like, hey, the British are coming. So the militias of the local areas are starting to assemble. All right. So the militia, they're known as the Minutemen, basically because they could get ready to fight in a minute's notice. So when we're talking about Lexington and Concord, we're talking about Lexington first. The British march there, and they are met by a little over 70 men of the Lexington militia, and there are about 400 British that get there at this point, and no one knows who fired the first shot. But you have all these British troops who are continuing to march in as like the first lines are squaring off with the militiamen, with the Minutemen, and out of nowhere a shot rings out, and then it's on. Bullets start flying, people are getting shot. A decent number of the militiamen at Lexington get shot, and they run off, and the British They then ransack the town looking for whatever they can find. They find nothing, and then they start marching back to Boston. But as that happens, everybody from the surrounding area is starting to come in on them. It's like more and more militiamen start pouring into the area. So, oh, wait. It was Concord where it all really got started. They shot their way through Lexington with their where the 70 were. Then they get to Concord. That's where they find the most resistance. Then they're marching their way back, and the entire way back, they are being hounded and they're being shot at and attacked by militiamen the entire way back to Boston. Okay? Now, then when they get to Boston, they're outnumbered a good 2-1 by the militiamen, by the Minutemen. And then Boston basically falls under siege by the militiamen. All right. So all of these events that we've just spent time talking about are going to lead up to the writing of the Declaration of Independence. This is the last thing we're talking about today. So don't worry, we're almost done. So there was one meeting already. The First Continental Congress, don't need really to worry about it all. The second one is the important one. So May 19, 1775 is when it begins. George Washington, hero of the French and Indian War and a very prominent and important Virginian, he is appointed the commander-in-chief of the Continental Forces, the American Army, and appointed 5 men to write the declaration stating the colony's intent and the reasons for independence. There were 56 delegates, so 56 representatives of the colonies that met and debated, and each colony had one vote, and they deliberated for a year from 1775 into 1776. They were meeting constantly, like every day for an entire year to get this thing figured out. Now, they are going to draft the Declaration of Independence. It is approved for signature. It is approved on July 2nd. On July 4th, the Declaration is written by Thomas Jefferson and signed by John Hancock, which was the first person to sign it, and he signed it with the biggest signature. That's why when someone asks you for your signature, sometimes you hear them, let me get your John Hancock. All right? And that was because he was already a wanted man, and he wanted to be sure that the king saw his name was there. And this is officially going to sever the ties between the American colonies and Great Britain. We are now independent. You are invading us. You're a foreign invader. Now, the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, like everybody else, knew what this would mean. So he wanted to make sure that the document explained why the colonists wanted to separate. In the second paragraph, we have one of the main philosophies, and that all men are created equal. We're all equal to one another. No one is born above or below anyone else. And that the government's purpose is to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people. And when the government fails to do so, the citizens of that country have a right to overthrow it and put a new one in place. And overthrow is not for minor reasons. But when treatment becomes absolute despotism, which is basically abusive, like excessively abusive. All right, 3 basic principles are the natural rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Popular sovereignty, people are the source of power and order. The importance of stability in a government, and that overthrowing a government is the single last resort, the last thing you should ever do. Right, grievances. So, the grievances, the problems that they had with the king, with England. Dismissing colonial legislatures and denying the colonists the right for self-government. Taxation without representation. Why can we not have a seat in Parliament that represents our interests? Taxing the colonists without their consent, like that goes that those first two are together. Is like, how can you tax us and make it and just say whatever it is when we have no way to argue against it or to at least get a better deal? We wouldn't mind paying taxes. We just want to say and how it happens. That's what they wanted, and it was denied. All right. Maintaining an army in the colonies without the consent of the legislature and elevating the military above citizen authority. Like, how dare you force us to house soldiers in our homes and them eat our food, and like we have no say in it at all? How dare you do that, King George? And forcing it's just like it's like all these problems that we've been talking about already in this video. It's exactly like this, and this. These are our problems. You brought this on yourself, King. All right. Making judges dependent on the king for their salaries so that they are not giving fair trials. People are supposed to have a fair trial by jury of their peers, and that's not really happening. Cutting off trade, you're going to economically cripple us just because we have some issues. All right. So, yeah. Now, results of the independence. Like while it was being written, 86 changes were made to the Declaration, 500 words were taken out. There are 1,337 words in it. 18 signers of the Declaration were under the age of 40 years old. 3 of them were in their 20s. Half of them were judges and lawyers, so they definitely knew how to make this thing legally binding. 11 of them were businessmen, and 9 were prominent landowners and farmers, guys like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And 12 of them were doctors, ministers, and politicians, so people who were very prominent in their communities. Now, the impact that it has on today. So the idea of equality led to the Civil War, women's rights movement, and the civil rights movement. We would later go on to influence the French Revolution, like I mentioned at the beginning, the Latin American revolutionary movements, and also the Vietnam War. It's going to inspire Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of North Vietnam, to invade the South Vietnam. During World War II, it was kept at Fort Knox, Kentucky, because we didn't know if we were going to be invaded by the Nazis or by the Japanese. And more than 1 million Americans view it at the National Archives every year in Washington, D.C. Just a couple interesting facts about it. Now, important information about some of the signers. Of the 56, 9 of them would die during the revolution. 5 of them would be captured and imprisoned, all treated brutally. 12 of them, their homes were completely destroyed. 17 lost everything they owned, their homes, their businesses, their families, everything. Not one ever went back on what they said. They stood by what they wrote with the Declaration till the day they died. Now, and a lot of them had a lot to lose. If they were found out to have been a part of this, and if they were ever, well, they knew who they were because, they all signed their name on it. So if any of them were ever captured, they had a very strong chance of being not only imprisoned for a long time, but more than likely it would lead to execution. So, yeah. All right. This is where we're going to end today. When we come back next time, we are going to be going over the Revolutionary War itself, the actual campaign, the fighting that happened. All right, be sure you come back for that.